Hi everybody, my name is Ian, and today I want to talk to you about positioning in DOTA Underlords. This is a topic I hear beginner players ask about a lot, partly because I imagine it's hard to give universally true good answers to it. So I want to talk to you about 5 tips that you want to keep in mind when you're doing your positioning, and hopefully it'll help level up your game. First thing I want to talk about is distributing damage. It's pretty obvious that you want your beefy units like warriors and knights to cover for your more fragile units like mages and hunters, but things are a little bit more complicated than just that. Generally, you want your frontline units to receive damage in equal distribution. This means that they each stay alive longer. The easiest way to achieve this is to group them together so that they hit the enemy team at the same time and are more likely to have different units attacking different targets as opposed to all of them attacking one unit at the same time. Here's a good way to see that concept in action. Our positioning right here is quite spread out, and when combat starts, Tusk attracts most of the aggro of the neutral units, which means he dies fairly quickly. Afterwards, the aggro shifts to one of the anti-mages, and we are able to close things out just barely with our final anti-mage, but this was not a particularly impressive victory. We can use an alternative positioning like this, and what happens when the battle starts is the aggro is distributed more evenly between the 3 units. One of our anti-mages does end up dying, but overall it is a more successful battle than the one shown in the previous clip. There are some important exceptions to this rule, so I want to bring in a distinction between what I consider frontline units and tanks. Tanks are a variety of frontline unit that is ultra beefy but has miserable damage output. The purpose of these units is to act as a distraction and a meat shield for the rest of your damage dealing units. You're actually happy for these to die first because they're just aiming to be a sponge. You want to suck up whatever it is, 3,000, 4,000 damage of your opponent's aggro and let the rest of your units do what they can. You want to try to position yourself such that these do attract the maximum possible aggro and allow the rest of your team to move around that. There are really only a couple of units that fall under this category. Axe and Pudge are the most obvious examples, though you can also use Treant Protector and Lone Druid or paired knights of any type, especially if they have a damage reduction item on them. For the second tip, I want to start by asking a question. Why do high-level players position Enigma in the front line of their compositions? He's a ranged unit, and he's also a very valuable unit too. You don't want to be blown up maybe in combat, and he's also not particularly tanky. So why do they do this? Well, mana generation is related to both the damage that you're dealing and the damage that you receive. In order for Enigma to charge up his ultimate as quickly as possible, you actually want him to be taking hits so that he can fire it off. He'll probably die immediately afterwards, but that's fine. He's done his purpose. Enigma is probably the most obvious example of this effect, but there are some other ones as well. If you're playing Kunkka Techies or Tide Hunter, it can be sometimes tempting to position these units in such a way where they're not going to be as directly involved in the combat, on the theory that if they survive a little bit longer, they'll be more likely to be able to actually use their ultimates. This thinking is incorrect. You only charge mana when you're actually participating in combat in some way. So it's important to position these units not just in the front line, but where they're very likely to be dealing and receiving damage. That way they get their ultimates off more quickly, and they're going to be more impactful in the battle overall. Remember, a Tide Hunter who fires off a Ravage at the end of battle may as well not have fired it off at all. If you want him to be impactful, you should be placing him front and center. It feels risky, but he's much more likely to do what you want in the course of the game. The next tip is about controlling the movement of your opponent's army and your own army. You might have noticed that many players put Keeper of the Light in the corner. This is for the purpose not only of defending him, but to encourage the opponent's army to bunch up as it's trying to move towards that corner. Once he fires off the Illuminate, it really maximizes the damage when they're all bunched in like this. There are lots of ways to apply this concept outside of the late game. The composition that we have right now on the screen wants the Pudge to receive the majority of the aggro, but we also want the Tusk and the Tiny to receive the Drow Ranger aura when combat starts. By positioning them just a step back, they move up, still in range of the Drow Ranger, and are able to get that bonus throughout combat. These types of compressed positioning patterns have a downside though. When you get into the late game, you realize that area of effect spells are basically what defines combat. Things like Ravage, Kunkka's Boat,
Enigma's Black Hole, etc. When you have all of your units bunched in closely together, they're much more vulnerable to these types of spells, and you'll find your team is getting eviscerated by them. Even though you're going to have to give up on some of your bonuses and maybe have a little bit less control on combat, it's pretty important that you spread things out so that you don't have your entire team wiped by one good ultimate from your opponent's side. The last tip I want to leave you with is about late game counter positioning. When you get to the 1v1 that defines the end of the game, you have a lot of information about your opponent's composition. If you can use the information that you have about the units that are the most important, you can find ways to counter those in creative fashions. You can take a human unit and attempt to silence it using their bonus. You can use a unit with a Scythe of Vice on it in order to turn them into a pig. You can also place your own anti-mage or Tidehunter in front of it with the hopes of shutting them down before they're able to get their ultimates off. This is a really powerful way to disable these key units from the opponent's side and give you a massive advantage when you're trying to finish things up. Speaking of finishing things up, I think that'll be it from me today. Be sure to like and comment if you liked this, so that I can talk more about positioning in the future, such as, for instance, the different varieties and what kind of positioning different compositions are looking for, maybe how items fit into it, etc. Beyond that, I also do a lot of other content on the channel as well, mainly gameplay stuff, but there's some other more deep divey stuff in there as well. So check all of that out, and subscribe, set notification. I would really appreciate all of that. Thank you so much for checking this out, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video.